even if you're on welfare, you're still poor." With those words, the two left the house. I felt all the strength leave my body and just slumped down right there. I remembered what Luke had said earlier. Susan is indeed independent, but I've always felt like my pride as a man was being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with Emily. So, please divorce me. I became indifferent to everything and expressed my intention to divorce by accepting the divorce papers. After a while, I decided to discuss compensation with the two of them, with a lawyer present. Shamelessly, an unrelated sister demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst into laughter and said, "Aren't you the one on welfare?" Faced with such an unexpected turn of events, my sister was taken aback and let out a ridiculous scream. Immediately after, upon seeing the documents the lawyer had placed on the table, my sister's face turned pale. "My name is Susan. My husband, Luke, and I have been married for 18 years, and I am 45 years old, while Luke is 3 years younger, at 42. We have a daughter, Lily, who is currently 17 years old and in her second year of high school. It's an important time for her as she will be taking exams next year. Luke and I met through work. I was working at a real estate company, and Luke was working at a related company. We hit it off over a trivial matter and started going out privately quite often. Luke has a very delicate personality and often struggles to make decisions. Back then, I found his indecisiveness cute and was attracted to him, wanting to take care of him in various ways. I genuinely thought so because I have a younger brother who is much younger than me. At first, I saw Luke as a brother and took care of him, but gradually, I was attracted to his more masculine sides, and we got married after seriously dating. Though Luke was usually indecisive, he took the initiative to confess and propose, which convinced me that I could marry him. He made decisions when it really mattered, and that gap made me feel I could trust him with my life. And so, we had Lily and never once experienced a serious argument or a crisis of divorce until now. I thought we would start our second life as a couple after Lily became an adult. "Hey, Susan. Could you let me live in this house for a bit?" That's what my sister, Emily, said as she showed up unannounced, dragging a large suitcase. Besides a brother, I have another sibling, and that's the sister standing before me. We have a good relationship with my brother, probably because of the age gap. However, I've always had a difficult relationship with my sister, who is close in age to me. Being smaller, I always had to wear my sister's hand-me-downs. "Wow, this is nice. Give me some too." Saying that, my sister snatched the new doll my parents had bought for me and handed me her old, worn-out doll instead. My sister's behavior didn't stop there. Taking things was still somewhat endearing compared to what came next. In elementary school, she took all my friends. And when I got my first boyfriend in high school, she seduced him away. That's why I chose a different university to avoid her, but she still interfered, ruining my supposed-to-be enjoyable university life. I still dislike my sister to this day. If possible, I don't want to have anything to do with her. So, I studied hard, obtained a real estate license, moved to New York, and lived a life without seeing my sister. Even our wedding was decided after consulting with Luke, and we opted for a photo wedding just for the two of us. Knowing my sister's personality, my parents kept my marriage a secret. Yet, somehow, she found out and is here now. Just when I thought Lily was about to become a college student, and we could finally have some time for ourselves or as a couple. Wow, for Susan, you're living in a pretty nice house. Is this a single-family home? Did you buy it? Oh, there's an empty room here. I'll use this one. My sister's shrill voice snapped me back to reality. Hey, this is a problem. What do you mean by suddenly showing up? My husband and daughter live here too, we can't just let you stay. Ignoring my words, my sister began to snoop around the house. Today was a holiday, but Lily was out attending summer classes. And Luke had been gone since the morning due to work. Hey, can you leave before the two of them come back? I asked her repeatedly, but my sister wouldn't listen. And then, finally, in the evening, the two of them came home. Who might this be? Luke, looking puzzled, was greeted by my sister, who, despite being 46, was laying on the charm as if she were much younger. Nice to meet you. I'm Emily, Susan's sister. When did you two get married without telling me? There was no greeting or report, and I had no idea. I was bored. So I went to visit our parents' house, and from our mother's room. I accidentally found a photo of you two from your wedding photo. You're so secretive. Even though we're sisters. Luke knew I had a sister. Perhaps realizing she was exactly as I had described, he looked a bit troubled. But I didn't miss it. Luke was slightly smitten by my beautiful sister, and his cheek became practically reddish. Lily, too, looked perplexed upon returning home. No wonder. Suddenly, an aunt she had never met was staying at our house. But my sister forcefully moved the conversation towards living together. Actually, I got fired from my job. And it's been hard to come up with rent and living expenses. So I was wondering if I could stay here for a bit. Well, if it's just for a little while, I guess it's okay. What? Now is not the... Lily has her exams next year, a crucial time. I tried to say that, but the two of them didn't listen to me and got excited on their own. Actually, I've heard about your sister from Susan. It's fine. I guess since Susan was avoiding me. You were just going along with it, right? Sorry about our little sister. And so, the tumultuous daily life began. My sister demanded money without doing any housework, and eventually, she started taking cash from my wallet. This all happened within just 1 week after she started living with us. I repeatedly warned her about this, but she wouldn't listen. Hey, if you need money, at least tell me what you're buying or why you need it. Don't just take it from my wallet without asking. Huh? Why do I have to report to you what I'm buying? Because it's my money. If she was fired, I wished she would job hunt and quickly move out. But it didn't look like she was looking for a job, and recently, I've noticed that Luke and Emily's times away from home overlap. Luke said he was working overtime, but there was never any overtime pay included in his salary. I complained about this. You're not getting paid for overtime in your salary, right? If you can't say it, shall I speak on your behalf? Huh? Are you doubting me? I'm properly getting paid overtime separately. So there's no problem at all. Luke, usually mild-mannered and never angry, raised his voice for the first time. This alone was a shock to me because Luke was not someone who resorted to emotional arguments or sudden outbursts. From this point on, I began to feel a sense of crisis about our current lifestyle. My sister continued to lounge around at home, costing more money than ever. Even more than what we spend on Lily, leaving me nothing but sighs. I discussed this with our parents. They apologized for their lack of oversight, which led to my sister finding out about my marriage and current home. But the fault wasn't with my parents. It was my sister, who, despite us trying to live quietly away from our dear parents, tracked down our home and clung to me. By the time she found our photo wedding, she must have been preparing to track down where we live. I'm sure she's thinking of taking something from me again to make me unhappy. Now, I even doubt whether she was really fired from her job. She might have quit on purpose to freeload off me and ruin my life. That's what I've started to think. If that's the case, I need to kick her out of the house as soon as possible. Hey, you said you were fired, but if you were enrolled in employment insurance, shouldn't you be able to receive unemployment benefits? I've always been part-time, so I wasn't enrolled in that kind of thing. That's why I'm in trouble. I could have gone back to our parents' house. But I can't just let our elderly parents take care of me, right? Then, as an independent sister, it's your responsibility to take care of me. That's common sense. I was at a loss for words for her nonsensical statement. After dropping out of college, my sister has always been working part-time and has never been employed full-time. Knowing this fact later made me realize why her job hunting wasn't going well. 3 months after my sister started freeloading, I finally caught them cheating. I had been suspicious, but to actually see them cheating. When a client canceled a meeting that day, I went to a cafe to kill time and saw my sister and Luke walking together outside. They were holding hands and chatting happily. It's unthinkable for a brother-in-law and sister-in-law to hold hands like that. At that moment, I was convinced they were having an affair. After a while, when I had made up my mind, I confronted them at home. So the overtime was a lie, huh? Sister, you were pretending to be job hunting and just hanging out with Luke. The worst. Even at this age, you can't be satisfied without taking something from me. That's why I've been hiding the fact of my marriage from you. Bursting with emotion, I conveyed my feelings, and they easily admitted to their affair. Then, they began to say things that further got on my nerves. If I had known such a beautiful person was your sister, I wouldn't have been misled by Susan to avoid her. Susan is indeed independent, but I've always felt my pride as a man was being hurt. From now on, I want to build a family with Emily. So, please divorce me. He presented me with a divorce paper. Understood, it's impossible to rebuild anything now. Emily, Luke. From now on, I won't be taking care of your finances at all, so just so you know. After saying that, my sister burst out laughing and said this. Even welfare recipients get by, you poor thing. Huh? Wondering what she was talking about, Luke, half smiling, began to say something even more astonishing. Right. Since custody usually goes to the mother, right? I think it's better for our daughter to be with her mother, Susan, than with me. Just do whatever you want. With those words, the two of them left the house. A few minutes later, Lily came home and was puzzled by the unusual quietness of the house. So, I honestly told her that we were getting a divorce. Initially surprised, Lily seemed somewhat relieved to accept the situation. A while later, the divorce was finalized. I decided to have a meeting with the two of them, accompanied by the lawyer I hired. Shamelessly, my sister demanded a share of the assets. However, the lawyer burst into laughter and said, "Aren't you the one on welfare?" Faced with such an unexpected turn of events, my sister was taken aback and let out a ridiculous scream. Immediately after, upon seeing the documents the lawyer had placed on the table, my sister's face turned pale. There's no money to be divided as assets between this couple. At those words, my sister looked shocked, glancing back and forth between me and Luke. Of course, Luke, too, was surprised to be told that they had hardly any assets. Anticipating this, as soon as I witnessed Luke and my sister's affair, I took a certain action. Therefore, the only cash available between us was a mere $12,000. As a couple celebrating their 18th anniversary, it's hard to believe this was all the savings they had. Hey, what's going on? You had a lot of savings, right? Luke, utterly confused, asked in a panic. Watching him, I felt a surge of anger. You really have no interest in Lily at all, do you? We talked about it. I've been saving up for her education, and I decided to transfer it to Lily's account. You said to do as I please. So, I transferred all the savings I had to Lily's account. Most of my savings were for her education. You know that better than anyone, don't you? Lily is managing her money herself, and I even paid gift tax on it. So it's no longer considered our savings. After I smugly explained, Luke's face turned pale as he remembered the conversation. So, what's the breakdown of the $12,000? About 80% of it is Luke's secret savings, I guess. Saying that, Luke had a look of, "How did you know?" on his face. You knew about it, and that's why you transferred your savings to Lily. Anticipating the division of property? You agreed to it. Remember, you signed the consent form yourself. Luke became angry. I thought it was strange. Why would you ask for my agreement just for that? Luke was scratching his head and looked deeply regretful. But since he had signed it himself, it was too late to claim anything back. The lawyer confirmed that since Luke had agreed to the gift to Lily, the money was no longer considered marital savings. I didn't want such money to go to these two people. Thinking about it, I decided on a lifetime gift. Hearing this, my sister was dumbfounded but somehow managed to say to Luke, Hey, you said we had a lot of savings. Weren't we supposed to live a luxurious life together? Dividing $12,000 isn't going to amount to much. Why didn't you realize Susan's intentions earlier? While she was turning pale and blaming Luke, he just looked away and kept silent. Luke had a low salary and was burdened with a large amount of student loans. So he hardly contributed to the living expenses for a while after we got married. But this was agreed upon. When Luke discussed with me that it was difficult for him to contribute to the living expenses, I said, Understood, I'll take care of the living expenses completely. So, could you focus on saving money for our retirement as much as possible? Thus, I have been covering all living expenses for over a decade. Luke thought he could save at least $1,000 or more every month. But when it came down to it, the total amount was less than $10,000. I had thought that saving would be easy since he didn't have to pay for living expenses. But Luke had been wasting money behind my back. I felt betrayed when I accidentally saw his bank statement left on the desk, revealing the savings amount. But now that we are divorced, it doesn't matter anymore. My sister, finally realizing the severity of the situation, started to tremble and desperately thought about what to do next but couldn't come up with anything. Knowing my sister was confused about the mere $12,000 in cash, I decided to reveal another truth. I was debating whether to say this, but Luke, you're planning to quit your job, aren't you? Suddenly, Luke, who had been silent and avoiding eye contact, looked at me. Luke was visibly shaken, his eyes darting around as he exclaimed, How do you know I'm planning to quit my job? I've only told the boss about that. I thought so when I saw the statement. What I pointed out was the fact that there was no overtime pay. But actually, I was puzzled by another section, the consumption of paid leave. Luke previously left a real estate company and now works for a construction company. But I've never seen him take more than the minimum 5 days of paid leave. Despite this, the recent pay stubs Luke brought home showed that he had taken a bulk of paid leave. Taking a lump sum of paid leave usually suggests resignation. Since then, I suspected their affair and thought perhaps, thinking they would get a large inheritance after divorcing me, he decided to quit his job. I couldn't believe my suspicions were actually correct. To Luke's overly optimistic thinking, I couldn't help but sigh. Well, you were my husband, after all. You should know what job I've been doing and how much wealth I've accumulated. To rely on that for an affair and even choose to resign, really? You've thought nothing of the consequences. As I said this, Luke's face turned red. The lawyer's comment to my sister about welfare implied that without jobs, that's where they'd end up. My sister quickly became anxious, but then shouted something in realization. Wait a minute. If you can single-handedly cover Lily's college expenses and living costs, there must be something fishy going on. I get it, you're hiding assets, aren't you? That's obvious. Come on, confess already. Hearing my sister's words, Luke also seemed to have a realization. Yeah, that's right. Emily, actually, Susan owns a lot of real estate. So we have to divide that as assets. Close call, I almost got tricked. Real estate is a significant asset, so we need to split it fairly between us. You've been acting all high and mighty, but you're the one playing dirty tricks. Watching them laugh about it, I was just appalled. The lawyer couldn't help but let out a laugh. The tension in the air peaked as the lawyer cleared his throat and began to explain the facts. If you're going to talk about property division, you might want to study up a bit first. Luke, as the ex-husband, you should know that Susan owns real estate through her company, which makes a profit. Corporations and individuals are separate entities. Susan's company is her separate property, and it's not subject to division in the divorce. Convinced by the professional's words, the two's faces turned beet red and froze. The lawyer continued, detailing further. What we're looking at includes cars, houses, and cash savings. Susan can claim, let's say, property division, debts you owe to her, and spousal support from Luke. Seeing the payments amount the lawyer showed, their faces contorted. Isn't that a bit much? Yeah. Normally, you don't see such amounts for this kind of thing, right? They started making excuses, clearly not expecting this development. But I quickly countered. Oh, who decided that? The market rate is just a benchmark. Luke took time off for secret dates with my sister, and she didn't even seriously look for a job. Just spent my money. The lawyer, seeing these facts objectively, settled on this amount. What? Would you have preferred it to be higher? At that, they hurriedly shook their heads. The discussion didn't conclude that day, but I felt a firm sense of achievement. 2 weeks later, we met again for discussions. Surprisingly, my sister took a defiant attitude. Give me the house and the car. That's like property division, right? Then give Luke's $12,000 to you. That should be fine, right? Her ridiculous claim almost made me shout in anger. However, I managed to control my temper and calmly assessed the situation. The house still had a mortgage, and I always maintained it, so it would have some value if sold. The car, too, was bought new and was only 5 years old. Both would fetch a reasonable price, but accepting my sister's proposal would mean a loss for me. That was something I absolutely did not want. Sister, did you even do the math? If you included the money from selling the house and the car, you wouldn't be saying such things. Normally, it's not the cheaters who make such demands, but me. As I was about to continue, Luke interrupted with his own assertion. You have assets worth $170 million at the company, right? I don't know if you're some kind of real estate mogul, but it's crazy to be so greedy with that much wealth. Although I was taken aback for a moment, their behavior was so absurd that I burst into laughter. Given the situation, my sudden laughter made the two freeze. After a good laugh, I returned to a serious expression. So, is that all you wanted to say? And why are you acting like the victim here? Greedy? I'm fine with being called greedy. I'd rather keep as much as I can for Lily than hand it over to a man who abandons his daughter for an affair and a sister who steals her brother-in-law's husband. They flinched. As the lawyer mentioned before, if you want to use legal terms, you'd better study more. How could they misunderstand to such an extent? I decided to crush their hopes gradually. Luke, this house is under my name, right? I know that, but we've lived together, so. So what? It's my separate property since I bought it on a loan before we got married. If you want the car, you'll need to pay me half its appraisal value. That's how property division works. I own 2 cars, one is the new car currently being discussed. And the other is a used compact car, which probably isn't worth much. But, the lawyer said, homes and cars fall under property division. Look, the lawyer only mentioned what typically falls under property division. Not that it applies here. What's up for division between us is Luke's secret savings, combined with my savings totaling $12,000. Plus the 2 cars. That's all. My sister was obviously uninformed, and Luke hadn't thought things through. Which led them into another predicament. Despite showing signs of contemplation, Luke eventually pleaded with me for money to start his new life, without showing genuine remorse. Given your attitude, it seems you wouldn't want to pay child support for Lily anyway. Why should I worry about your living expenses? I firmly dismissed their superficial apologies. And they reluctantly signed the necessary documents, realizing they couldn't sway me. After everything was settled, Emily frequently called to complain about Luke's debts. Why did Luke have so much debt? You were paying the living expenses, right? Then, why would he need to borrow money? What's going on? How dare you push such a guy onto me? It should have been obvious when he had saved less than $1 million despite years of opportunity. Maybe he took out loans for big purchases, something like that? Emily frantically explained the situation, revealing Luke had taken out loans for unnecessary luxury items and struggled with credit card payments set to revolving credit. I didn't push him onto you, you took him away, remember? I replied half-jokingly, leaving Emily speechless. Luke had been hiding debts even from me, and now, collection notices were arriving. Oh, there's one more thing I haven't told you, sister. What now? Although Emily was completely terrified, hearing about the debts reminded me of something. Luke had mentioned he was working in construction now. But his company is actually a sole proprietorship. While they withhold income and residence tax, he's responsible for managing other necessary payments himself. Due to some mix-up, a national pension reminder came to our house. I contacted Luke and got permission to open it, finding it was a reminder. It seems he had been hiding it all along and I had no clue. I've been paying my own national pension, and I assumed Luke was too. When I called Luke about opening the reminder, he begged for help, almost crying. National pension costs this much? No way, I can't pay this. We're family, right? Help me out, will you? Huh? What are you talking about? Are these words supposed to come from someone who abandoned his wife and child? Once again, my logic left Luke speechless. Discussing this, it seemed Emily on the other end of the phone also lost her words in despair. So, you'll have to figure it out yourselves. After ending the call, Luke also contacted me, complaining about the high taxes on the car he took and the unexpected cost of its inspection. Maintaining a car costs so much? I was shocked by the tax, thinking it was just a few thousand, but it's in the tens of thousands. And the inspection costs so much. It's tough, huh? Can't you take it back? No. After a brief response, Luke hung up, deflated. Subsequently, he sent emails begging for help, but when I warned, if you keep this up, I'll report you for stalking to the police, the messages stopped. A harsher hell awaited the two. Later, I heard Luke and Emily ended up divorcing after just 3 months of marriage following our divorce. Their plan might have been doomed from the start. When they realized the house wasn't subject to division and was in my name, Marrying with millions in debt and compensation was never going to work. After the divorce, their squabbles worsened. Emily was ever greedy for money. Sell the new car. Keeping it is a waste. Better to turn it into cash, right? Huh? I don't care about such petty cash. Besides, I paid all of Emily's compensation. So if we're splitting, you owe me that money. They couldn't easily divorce due to such petty arguments. Eventually, Luke chose to declare bankruptcy. I had already collected the compensation in full, so it didn't affect me. But this left Luke jobless, penniless, and eventually a homeless man. He couldn't retract his resignation and left the company as he had said. His useless pride prevented him from applying for welfare. Now, he might be living a miserable life, begging like a beggar. Emily faced divine retribution. Her affair and quick divorce became well known, ruining her relationships. Disowned by her family and relatives, and with no company willing to hire someone like her. Her job hunt was a struggle. Even if she got hired for a part-time job, her terrible attitude, always blaming others, got her fired instantly. The lawyer's words, "Welfare would be your fate," became reality. Now, she's at the welfare office, trying to get support but unable to due to her possessions. Eventually becoming homeless like Luke. Their selfish actions not only hurt me but also Lily, so this punishment seems only fitting. Now that it's just the two of us, life has continued without much change. With Luke gone, who never did anything for Lily yet always complained. Telling her to study or to get into a good university, Lily said she felt relieved. And impressively, she got accepted into a state university. Seeing my daughter about to start college this spring fills me with renewed admiration. Work keeps me busy in the best possible way, and though I'll soon be 46, I'm still in good health. It makes me want to keep pushing forward even more. I'm turning this place into a guest house? Upon hearing Patrick's words, Mandy and I exclaimed in surprise at the same time. What? What are you talking about? At the same time as our surprise? We were convinced that the scene before us was undoubtedly the site where our family home had been demolished. Can you explain to us in a way we can understand? Is this what you're doing? I pressed Patrick, who was still smirking, with a stronger tone. Seeing Patrick's demeanor, Mandy suddenly burst into laughter. Wait a minute. Stop it, Dad. It seems that the absurdity and ridiculousness of her father, who had been restraining her all this time, filled her with pity and amusement from the bottom of her heart. Gasping for breath, Mandy spoke up. Grandpa's house was worth a lot, you know? Mandy said that and then suddenly turned serious. This is basically a crime, isn't it? Upon hearing his daughter's words, Patrick finally realized that the mistake he had made was irrevocable. My name is Hillary Foster. I am a 48-year-old housewife. Currently, I live with my husband Patrick and our only daughter Mandy. Mandy is 19 years old and a first-year university student. But it seems she has no intention of leaving home for the time being. Having Mandy, who has been on my side since we were children, in this house is a blessing for me, especially since we have a common enemy in Patrick. Patrick and I met when I was still working as a company employee. I had graduated from a community college and was working as an office worker at a local trading company. Patrick, who was working in sales at another company, frequented our office. Though sales sounds impressive, Patrick was doing a job that involved running errands for various companies. He was always charming clients, but he was friendly to me, an office worker. So I didn't have a bad impression of him. As we saw each other weekly, we started exchanging small talk and eventually became close. As I thought, Patrick seemed to be used as a jack-of-all-trades within his company, and his earnings were modest. However, perhaps because I was still young, I truly believed that love would see us through anything. I continued to work and support our household for a while, but I resigned when I became pregnant. Patrick wanted me to focus on childcare. With Mandy's birth, my responsibilities increased significantly. With Patrick away at work during the day, I had to take care of Mandy, do the cooking, laundry, and cleaning all by myself. I managed to get through those days, but by the time Mandy was in kindergarten, Patrick's attitude towards me had changed. Taking my silence for granted, Patrick's behavior became increasingly overbearing. At the company, he was ridiculed and exploited daily, and I became the target for his frustration. Patrick wasn't so self-deprecating when we first met, but perhaps I was too agreeable, which might have contributed to the problem. The people at the company just pushed troublesome tasks onto Patrick. They don't realize his true abilities. I don't think you should worry about it. I meant it as a consolation, but it inadvertently gave Patrick a twisted sense of confidence. Are you mocking me too, thinking you're better than me? Whenever I tried to point out anything, Patrick would explode in anger. This left me distressed and eventually, I stopped speaking up. My actions only served to inflate Patrick's ego further. Enduring for the sake of our daughter undoubtedly led to our current marital issues. However, I have tried to be a kind wife and don't believe I deserve to be blamed. When I think about it, it's all quite absurd. But the thought of us doing it for my daughter stops my reasoning. As we grew older, the relationship between my husband and I became more strained. My position as a housewife hasn't changed, but in society, there are positions and statuses appropriate to one's age. Such thoughts, even if not voiced, are communicated through attitudes. Patrick felt the gaze of those around him more than necessary and let it grow in a negative direction. His personality became more self-deprecating, and conversing with him became so exhausting. I hadn't realized until we got married. But it seems his personality hasn't changed since he was a child, and it appears he had no friends. The only attendees at our wedding were Patrick's relatives, with no friends in sight. I hadn't thought much of it at the time, but it's a strange story in hindsight. I still regret not noticing these details about Patrick during our time dating. Certainly, compared to the general public, Patrick's position at his company is low. But there are many others in similar positions. If one were to be nagged by family upon returning home, I could understand the concern. But I have never once complained to Patrick about such matters. Therefore, no matter what I do, Patrick's attitude remains unchanged. Originally shy, Patrick did not vent his stress outside, directing it all towards Mandy and me instead. Day by day, his drinking increased, and he would often loudly rampage, breaking things around the house. Although he never physically harmed us or inflicted direct damage, the exchange of heartless words escalated. Do you realize who you have to thank for being able to go to college? Always clinging to your mom. Think properly about who you should be grateful to. It's common to hear of teenage daughters disliking their fathers. But Mandy has solid reasons for disliking Patrick. It's only natural to dislike one's father when subjected to such unreasonable scolding daily. Mandy and I would complain about Patrick when he wasn't around, somehow managing to get through each day. Then, my father, who lives in the same state, fell ill. My mother had passed away several years earlier, so my father was living alone in our family home. My brother Jim runs a company in New York, so I was the one to check on my father for the time being. The diagnosis my father received at the hospital was not good. I blamed myself for not noticing sooner. My father, considerate of my brother living away and me with my own family, noticed the changes in his health, but kept silent. After consulting with the doctor, hospitalization was decided. and he began receiving as much treatment as possible. Still, it was clear that my father's condition was deteriorating day by day. And Jim started visiting him frequently, taking time away from his company. I was prepared for what was to come. Naturally, my days were filled with hospital visits. Being a full-time housewife, I couldn't keep up with all the household chores as before. While Mandy visited my father a few times and willingly helped me out, Patrick disapproved of this. "Haven't the meals been mostly frozen food lately? You're at home all day, so there's no need to use frozen food, right? And now, you're relying on our daughter during this time. You need to think about our life here too. It's troublesome." He took the opportunity to scold me and simultaneously badmouth my father. After having been taken care of by my father for so long, it's astonishing he could say such things. Has he forgotten how much trouble he has caused my father? When Mandy was born, there was a time when Patrick's earnings were not enough to support us. As I quit my job to focus on childcare, it meant an additional person's living expenses. Naturally, Patrick, without any sign of remorse, pressured me to figure it out. Out of desperation, I explained the situation to my father and asked for financial assistance. Knowing Patrick's situation, my father silently provided the funds without a word. Unaware of my father's feelings. Patrick took this for granted and relied on my father's generosity for a while. Although Patrick's income eventually increased a bit, he never expressed gratitude to my father. Trying not to upset Patrick further, I continued visiting my father. However, my father's condition suddenly worsened, and he passed away. Mandy and I were overwhelmed by a great sense of loss. But there were still many things that needed to be done. Various procedures, paperwork, and funeral preparations. The thought alone was dizzying, but being busy helped distract me. Knowing I was nearby, Patrick muttered to himself. "Finally, we can have a proper meal." Patrick's thoughtless remark irritated me. But I lacked the energy to argue and swallowed my words instead. Though my father's funeral had concluded, my emotions were still heavy. Uncharacteristically, Patrick showed a willingness to help with sorting through the family home's belongings. Perhaps reflecting on his past behavior, he actively participated in tidying up the house. "I've organized the documents, but is everything here?" His question reminded me of the safe my father had stowed away in the closet. And I asked Patrick to check its contents as well. I remembered that my father had given me the key to the safe when he was admitted to the hospital. So I handed the small key to Patrick. This is all that was inside the safe. He handed me old banknotes and documents containing our family tree that he had found inside the safe. I hadn't been expecting much, but since he had made a point to hand me the key, I thought perhaps something more significant was inside. Feeling somewhat let down by the contents Patrick handed me, I decided to return to the remaining tasks of sorting and organizing. The work didn't finish in one day, but over the next few days. We completed cleaning out my childhood home. Finally able to catch my breath, I was overwhelmed by an immense sense of fatigue. That's when I received a call from my brother Jim, who had returned to New York. "I'm really sorry for leaving all the cleanup to you. If there's anything I can do, please don't hesitate to tell me." After expressing his gratitude, he got to the point. "By the way, did you find the deed to the family home among the documents Dad was keeping? I hate to bring this up after Dad has passed, but there's something I need to discuss with you." He then began to talk about the inheritance of our father's estate. Jim, who runs a company involved in various businesses, was considering expanding into the food and beverage industry. He wanted me to transfer the rights to our family home to him. I vaguely remembered hearing as a child that our house had cultural value due to its unique construction. It resembled the old-style houses that have become popular for cafes recently. Jim planned to use our family home as it is to open a cafe. Actually, I had Dad's permission a long time ago. In exchange, he said everything else would go to you, Hillary. I know it's late, but could you agree to this plan? Jim has always doted on me since we were kids, and he's still single. He's not the type to seek a large inheritance for himself or his family. I'm well aware that he has more than enough savings. I wouldn't know what to do with the family home anyway. And if you're okay with it, Jim. I sincerely agreed to Jim's request and decided to transfer the rights to our family home to him. Managing it myself would eventually lead to its demolition anyway. It's better for Jim to make good use of it, and for the house to remain. Thank you. Could you check if the deed to the family home is among the documents Dad left? It should be there if Patrick organized everything. I promised to contact Jim as soon as I found the documents and ended the call. I haven't looked through the documents since then. They should all be in a clear case I put together. Remembering the case where Patrick had stored the documents, I began to search through it. However, no matter how much I searched, I couldn't find the deed to our family home that Jim mentioned. That's strange. I thought I put all the documents here. Could they still be at the family home? Worried that I might have accidentally thrown it away, I decided to go check the family home to avoid lingering anxiety. Upon arriving at the family home, I was shocked. Where the house should have stood, there was nothing but the remnants of a demolished building. Could I have taken a wrong turn somewhere? But no, that doesn't make sense. In my panic, I called Mandy to explain the situation, including Jim's plan to open a cafe and the cultural value of our family home. Sensing my distress, Mandy said, "I'm coming right now," and hung up. True to her word, Mandy soon arrived where I was. Mom. What happened? She seemed to have rushed over, her long hair wildly disheveled. Catching her breath, Mandy looked at me with concern. I can't seem to find our house anymore. As I repeated the situation to Mandy, I gradually began to calm down. Mom, you're not mistaken. This is definitely Grandpa's place. Indeed. The fact that Mandy arrived straight here confirmed that this was the location of my childhood home. Well, where the house used to stand. It's only been a few weeks since my father's funeral. I can't begin to guess what might have happened. Could my brother know something about this? That thought crossed my mind, but we had just spoken on the phone. It seemed impossible. The more I thought about it, the more I was at a loss about why the house had been demolished. The site looked like it was still under construction, but there was no one in sight. What should I do now? Call the police? While considering Mandy's opinion, I tried to settle my confused mind. Then, I saw someone walking towards us from a distance. Isn't that Dad walking towards us? Mandy raised her voice in surprise. I squinted at the approaching figure and confirmed it was indeed Patrick. Wearing his suit sloppily, he staggered towards us. It was just past 3 p.m. Was he returning from an external appointment? However, bumping into him here seemed too coincidental. My confusion deepened with Patrick's arrival, and all I could do was wait for him to speak. As Patrick got closer, I could see a smug smile on his face. Despite him being my husband, the sight sent a chill down my spine. Oh, you two are just in the right place. Without dropping his smirk, Patrick stopped in front of Mandy and me. Neither of us could open our mouths at the oddity and waited for his explanation. I'm turning this place into a guest house? At Patrick's words, Mandy and I simultaneously exclaimed in surprise. What? What are you talking about? Along with the shock, I was convinced that the scene before us was undoubtedly where the family home had been demolished. However, accepting it with a simple "okay" was out of the question. What was Patrick thinking? Despite racking my brain, I couldn't fathom his true intentions. Can you explain to us in a way we can understand? Is this what you're doing? I confronted Patrick, who continued to smirk insolently.
Yeah,
I did it all. Had to clear the land before moving forward. I plan to build a guest house with the savings I've accumulated over the years and my severance pay. Of course, I'll be needing your contribution too. Patrick spoke as if boasting, showing no sign of remorse. Could there be a legitimate reason for this rash action? He seemed almost irritated by our angry and bewildered expressions. With a resigned air, he continued. I've always wanted to start something on my own. Everyone else just barks orders at me without recognizing my talent. I can't be satisfied with that. So, I decided to operate a guest house here. Patrick stated this confidently, then looked at us again to gauge our reactions. However, his explanation only served to deepen our confusion. I'm sorry. I can't understand what you're trying to say at all. Fear began to spread within me due to his incomprehensible actions. I quit my job just now. Told off everyone I was fed up with and slammed my resignation on their desk. Your dad passing away at this time must be a message for me. It's finally time for me to take charge. Though Patrick was in an excited state, his plans were somewhat disjointed but understandable. In essence, he had quit his job to run a guest house. Seeking independence and authority without any objections from others, to carve out his future. Turning this into a guest house. Do you realize this land belongs to my father and brother? Do you think it's acceptable to do this without permission? It seemed unlikely that my father would have transferred the rights to Patrick, as he had previously mentioned passing the house and land to Jim. It's unthinkable that my brother would deceive me. And it's abnormal for a husband to quit his job and demolish the family home without consulting his wife. Permission or not, I have the deed. Being in charge of sorting through the belongings means we can do as we please with what's left. Doesn't it? There's no need for permission when your husband decides to do something. Patrick appeared unremorseful, speaking as if lecturing Mandy and me. That logic is absurd. I yelled out as soon as Patrick finished speaking. His selfish and childish rationale pushed me to my limit. This is my father's house, inherited by my brother and me. How can you, who are not even blood related, do something like this? Patrick seemed to realize the gravity of his actions upon hearing my rebuke. His smug smile briefly vanished, only to quickly justify his actions again. What kind of way is that to speak to your husband? Who do you think has been supporting our life until now? You just need to quietly follow what I say. Patrick, face red with anger, raised his voice without care for his surroundings. Struggling to breathe from the excitement, Patrick panted heavily. Watching him, Mandy suddenly burst into laughter. Wait a minute. Stop it, Dad. Tears welled up in her eyes from the sheer absurdity and pity of her father's incomprehensible actions and ridiculousness. Dad, don't you know? As she gazed at her father, struggling for breath, Mandy continued. Grandpa's house was incredibly valuable, you know? And you just demolished the house Uncle was supposed to inherit. Then, becoming serious. That's literally a crime, isn't it? Upon hearing his daughter's remarks, Patrick's face drained of color rapidly. What are you saying? How can you say such things to your father? Despite raising his voice, he lacked any real conviction or dignity. It seemed he was aware of his mistake somewhere deep down, but had tried to push through with his plan until his daughter called him out. Neither my brother nor I could ever condone such behavior. I'm going to call Jim. There's supposed to be a project underway to turn this place into a cafe. Patrick, aware of my brother's business ventures, understood the situation from just those words. What? That's bad. There's media coverage, and contracts are already progressing. I'll call back later, but please don't touch anything more at that site." Hearing my frantic call, Jim sounded panicked and quickly ended the call. "Just don't do anything more for now." This has turned into a huge mess. Jim's voice had leaked through the phone, causing Mandy and Patrick's faces to tense up. It seems Patrick had been plotting to build a guest house on this site. From the moment he said he'd handle the estate clearance, aiding in the house cleaning with the intent to find the deed. I didn't know about the cafe plan. Isn't it common sense to inform me about such important matters beforehand? Patrick, previously pale, now shifted blame to me and Jim, ignoring his own actions. His face regained its usual defiance, suggesting he saw no fault in his behavior. "Just don't do anything more for now. My brother is urgently contacting our partners." I was appalled by Patrick's audacity and decided to wait for my brother's call. Then, I noticed a man in a suit running towards us from across the street. "Excuse me. Are you Hillary Foster?" The man, who introduced himself with a business card, turned out to be my brother's secretary, currently on a business trip from New York for the cafe opening. He had rushed over after hearing about the situation at our family home. I was just in a meeting with the president of the company collaborating on the cafe project. The president is on his way here, very upset about the situation. After checking Patrick's face, the secretary continued. "I've heard the gist from the president, and it seems a significant amount of compensation liability may arise. Even though you are the sister's husband, you will be held responsible." Until now, he must have felt no sense of reality because only Mandy and I were blaming him. Hearing the word compensation liability from a stranger in a suit, Patrick's face turned pale once again. "Mom, can we afford to pay that? What's going to happen to us?" Mandy's words seemed to be the last straw for Patrick, who slumped to the ground. Supporting Patrick, who had weakly collapsed, we decided to return home. We invited my brother's secretary inside to wait for my brother's arrival from New York. Understanding the gravity of the situation but unable to do anything by ourselves, we faced a frustrating wait until my brother finally arrived as the day turned to night. "Hillary, I'm sorry, but Patrick will have to take responsibility for his actions." My brother began to explain the situation with a serious demeanor. The project to open a cafe using our family home had started a bit after our father passed away. My brother's company is well known in the industry, and the partner company had prioritized our project, putting their own on hold to dedicate all efforts to this joint venture. The cancellation of this cafe project would clearly result in immense damages. My brother was doing everything possible to keep the project alive. But if the family home itself has been demolished, I recalled the scene before us earlier and couldn't help but speak out. The demolition work was sloppy. It might take time, but since the materials are still there, we might be able to restore it. After letting out a deep sigh, my brother said this, but his expression remained stern. "Patrick, I didn't want to say this, but what you did is a crime. An apology won't suffice, but you'll join me in making them." Receiving these heavy words, Patrick, still pale, slowly nodded. A far cry from his previously high-spirited talk of life plans. It was embarrassing to expose my husband's disgrace in front of my brother. I felt ashamed for not seeing Patrick's true character, leading to this dire situation. Although my brother wouldn't blame me, I no longer intended to stay with Patrick. Legally, we were still married, but in my heart, Patrick had become a complete stranger. Accompanied by my brother and his secretary on an apology tour to the affiliated companies, Patrick faced criticism beyond his imagination. To explain the situation, the truth inevitably had to be told. When my brother disclosed the details to the other parties, Even those who had been calm towards him turned unanimously to criticize Patrick sharply. Patrick, who had believed his lack of recognition was everyone else's fault, crumbled easily when faced directly with remarks like, "You're finished as a person." By the time he returned home with my brother, his eyes were vacant, as if he might collapse at any moment. Fortunately, everyone accepted the apology out of respect for me. But of course, Patrick will bear the appropriate compensation responsibility. Patrick, overwhelmed by the financial implications, could hardly think straight. As for me, I had reached my limit. In front of Patrick, who had slumped down, I presented the documents I had prepared. "Now you finally understand why you're not appreciated, right? You've failed as a person. My patience with you has completely run out." I declared this clearly to Patrick and urged him to sign the divorce papers. Faced with such direct words from his wife, who had always been compliant, Patrick began to cry. "Please. Don't abandon me. What will become of me now? I've even quit my job, haven't I? We're a family, aren't we? We've lived together until now." Despite previously considering us merely as outlets for his stress, his seemingly reasonable words now had no effect on me. I continued to stare at the divorce papers, ignoring Patrick's pleas. No matter what I said at this point, it would be meaningless and wouldn't benefit Patrick in any way. After a while, realizing my resolve was unshakable, Patrick slowly signed the document. It was over. Patrick and I were officially strangers to each other from this point forward. Months later, though Patrick was spared criminal prosecution thanks to my brother's generosity, he was left with a massive debt. He assumed the liability for the compensation of the halted project, and, having divorced me, was also ordered to pay compensation for his reckless actions and verbal abuse towards us. It was an expected outcome, yet Patrick had failed to foresee it. His rash actions had inconvenienced many people. The severity of his wrongdoing was made clear to him during the apology rounds with my brother. Fortunately, Patrick's resignation was not taken seriously by his boss, allowing him to keep his job. Losing his job would have left him with no means to repay the vast debts he had incurred. His treatment at work would undoubtedly become harsher. But being forgiven for such an outrageous act was a blessing in itself. Patrick had lost his family, his property, and his pride in his supposed excellence was shattered. This would be his greatest punishment. I was concerned about how our divorce would affect Mandy, now an adult. To my surprise, she took the situation more lightly than I had anticipated. "I'll be fine as long as I have Mom, and I'm an adult now." Whether she was trying to comfort me or not, Mandy responded cheerfully. My brother's project to rebuild and renovate our childhood home managed to recover, although I had to rely on Patrick's compensation and the inheritance left by my father for living expenses. I was entrusted with running my brother's cafe. The partners of the cafe project, co-established with my brother, trusted me and assigned me various tasks. This allowed me to live a more fulfilling life than when I was a stay-at-home wife. Working in the place where I grew up with my parents and brother brought me great joy. Marriage is not the only source of happiness in life. Losing the security of being protected by someone might have meant gaining freedom in another sense. Currently, I do not feel downhearted. On the contrary, I feel more optimistic and hopeful, having found a new purpose in life.
I gave birth to twin babies. I'm expecting a gift of $12,000 for the birth celebration. Julia said this with a triumphant voice. I responded loudly to Julia. Okay. I'll come with my husband, the real estate king worth $500 million. Huh? Julia's bewildered voice could be heard over the phone. She probably heard from our parents that my marriage partner was a shabby ordinary man. What do you mean by $500 million? Exactly what I said. Julia seemed confused by my words. I couldn't help but chuckle. Then Julia, taken aback, retorted. That can't be possible, because… Well, let's discuss everything in person, including your behavior at that time. Wait a minute, sis. Then, I'll come tomorrow. I said that unilaterally and hung up the phone. Julia called me several times, but I ignored all of them. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. Imagining Julia's regretful face, I laughed out loud. My name is Anna Morrison. I am a 38-year-old housewife. I live with my husband, Ben. A housekeeper does the housework, so I live elegantly every day. However, Ben is my second husband. I divorced my first husband 6 years ago. I met Ben afterwards at a restaurant where I was working, and we remarried. My first husband, Chris, and I were married at my parents' recommendation. My father liked Chris, the president of a company that did business with my parents' company. I had no say in the matter, and the marriage was decided the day after our arranged meeting. Arranged meetings were rare in modern societies, but as the eldest daughter, I was always told to take over the family business, so it didn't seem so strange. That's why our marriage was anything but sweet. Chris, the president of a company with an annual turnover of $50 million, rarely came home and was often out and about. When he did come home and saw me, he would just make a disgusted face and go to his bedroom. I was getting sick of that life when suddenly, I was called back to my parents' house. You should get a divorce. What? Why all of a sudden? I was puzzled by my mother's sudden words. Chris' company was on the rise. There was no benefit to divorcing now. Could it be that she was pained by my situation? Hoping so, I was shocked the next moment. Why are Chris and Julia? Julia is my sister, 10 years younger than me. My parents adored her, practically ignoring me. And there was Julia, arm in arm with Chris, entering the room. Oh, sis. I've taken a liking to Chris. So, I'll have him, okay? Anna Morrison have him? Chris isn't a toy. But Chris likes me more, you know? Right? Julia said that, leaning on Chris. Then, Chris looked at me with a smirk. The moment I saw his eyes, I had a bad feeling. Younger girls are better, and Julia is more beautiful. I think Julia would be better as the wife of a CEO. How could you? Mom. I, feeling like I was about to be discarded for being older and not as young as Julia, called out to my mom for help. I was raised strictly as the eldest daughter, but I believed my mom loved me. That's why I told you to get divorced quickly. Give Chris to Julia since she wants him. You're the older sister, right? How could you? I was dumbfounded. I knew my mom favored Julia, but I never expected her not to be on my side, especially at a time like this. Then, my dad quietly spoke up. Just get divorced quickly. From today, Julia will be the successor of this house. It's shameful to have someone with a stain in the family registry. Once you're divorced, get out of here. Dad too. With tears blurring my vision, I received the divorce papers. Then, as my parents instructed, I packed up my belongings and was quickly kicked out of the house. Sis, you're going to have a hard time from now on, right? Here, take this as compensation. Julia is so kind. Be thankful. The two of them mockingly threw a bundle of cash at me. Holding the cash, I was at a loss for what to do next. What am I going to do now? Being a housewife, I had no means of earning money. After all, I had been trained in bridal training but had never even worked a part-time job. For the time being, I decided to go to a hotel to think about what to do next. First, I decided to secure a place to live. I moved to the next town and went to a real estate agency. Thanks to some savings I had, I was able to rent a place suitable for living alone without much trouble. I absolutely did not want to use the compensation thrown at me by the two. I was determined to get revenge someday. After renting a one-room apartment, the next step was to find a job. However, it was difficult to find employment. Then, I received a call from Julia on my smartphone. "Sis, didn't you know that Chris has influence over this whole area? No matter where you apply, you won't get hired." How could this be? I was at a loss. As Julia said, I was unable to find a job. Without the ability to work, my savings would eventually run out. I decided to move to a town far away. The place I moved to was a peaceful town, with the scent of the sea breeze. There, I was hired by a small restaurant and was able to work and live there. "Hey, give me some beer." "Yes. I'd like some snacks." Understood. Though I was not used to it, the customers were all kind to me as I served them food. Gradually, I began to do more, and eventually, people started calling me the poster girl of the place. Thanks to Anna's smile, I can do my best tomorrow too. "Aren't you going to get married, Anna?" "Ah. I'm not thinking about marriage anymore. That's such a waste." Right? I was often encouraged to remarry because I was still young, but each time, I would dodge the question. I definitely did not want to end up with someone like Chris again. "Anna, can I have a beer?" "Sure, Ben. You've had a long tiring day, haven't you?" Amidst everyone suggesting I remarry, Ben was the only regular who never made such teasing remarks. I found our conversations very comforting, and I started looking forward to his visits. It was about 3 years after I moved to this town that Ben asked me out on a date. "Would you like to go see the ocean?" "Huh? Ah, well, it's right in front of us." Seeing Ben flustered, which was uncharacteristic of his usually calm demeanor, made me chuckle. I didn't mind at all. I decided to accept his invitation. Our first date was nothing more than a walk on the sandy beach in front of the small restaurant, but we talked about various things. Ben shared that he had lost his parents early and was living alone in this town, which his parents loved. I talked about my family and Chris. Then, Ben cried on my behalf. I thought to myself, so, this is how I should have cried. I watched the tears flow from Ben's eyes with these thoughts in mind. After that, we went out together many times and eventually started dating. Honestly, I can't remember who said, "I love you" first. However, our relationship began very naturally. About a year later, Ben proposed to me. I always want to sail the ocean in the same boat as you." "Is that a proposal?" "That's the intention." I smiled warmly at Ben's lack of confidence and accepted his proposal. Then we got married. I had no intention of telling my parents or sister, but Ben suggested we at least inform my parents, so I contacted them for the first time in 4 years and decided to return home. "Oh, you're alive. Remarrying? Do as you please. But don't expect any support from us. If you're going to remarry such a poor-looking man, don't ever come back to this house." I was furious, my face turning red in front of Ben. Indeed, Ben does not have a taste for luxury. But he was wearing a high-brand suit that day. Despite this, I didn't want to have any more to do with parents who would say such things. I was about to speak out in anger when Ben said, "Then, I will take your daughter with me. We won't contact you again or ask for any support." Ben. My parents were surprised by Ben's forthright attitude but soon became angry, calling it rude. Ben, however, handled my parents with a smile and led me away from my childhood home. I didn't expect it to be that bad. "I'm sorry for making you feel uncomfortable." "No, don't worry about it. I feel a bit relieved." I said this with a smile to Ben, who seemed to relax a bit at my expression. Then, we returned to our new home. After a while, the number of anonymous calls increased. I ignored all of them and consulted with Ben. "Let's ignore them. But it's creepy, so let's change our number tomorrow." "Yes, thank you." I was very grateful for Ben's prompt response. The next morning, Ben made time immediately, and we went to change our phone number. After that, the anonymous calls stopped. I was relieved. However, soon after, I began receiving multiple calls from unknown numbers. Hello. The caller would hang up without saying anything. Feeling very uncomfortable, I consulted with Ben again. He suggested ignoring calls from unknown numbers, so I ignored all such calls. Eventually, the calls ceased, and I gradually forgot about the whole incident. One day, I received a call from my childhood home, which I had forgotten to remove from my phone book after cutting ties. Reluctantly, I answered, expecting it to be my mother, but it was Julia. Hello, sis. How are you? Julia. Don't sound so scary. It's understandable that my voice would reveal my feelings, as she's the last person I'd ever want to speak to. For starters, I decided to confirm my immediate suspicion. How did you get my number? It was easy to find. You know, I have money. Her tone confirmed to me that Julia hadn't changed at all. I was about to hang up when Julia started talking excitedly. I gave birth to twin babies. I'm expecting a gift of $12,000 for the birth celebration. Julia said this with a triumphant voice. I responded loudly to Julia. Okay. I'll come with my husband, the real estate king worth $500 million. Huh? Julia's incredulous voice came through the phone. She probably heard from our parents that my husband was some ordinary, unremarkable man. What do you mean by $500 million? Exactly what I said. Julia seemed confused by my words. I couldn't help but chuckle. Then, Julia snapped back. That can't be true, because... Well, we can talk about it in person, including what you did back then. Wait a minute, sis. Then, I'll come tomorrow. I unilaterally ended the call. Julia called several times after that, but I ignored all her calls. I'm looking forward to tomorrow. I waited for Ben to come home and explained the situation. Ben smiled and suggested, I'll go in my usual attire. I nodded in agreement and decided to wear my usual clothes as well, and return to my childhood home. I'm home. Oh, you're back. Did you bring your husband? Wait, Julia, smiling, rushed to the entrance but was shocked by our attire. Naturally, since the clothes we wore were bought from a non-brand, common store, with each piece costing about $20. What's with those shabby clothes? Aren't you a real estate king? I responded with a smile. Julia interpreted it her way and made a mocking expression. So, it was a lie after all. You can't hide it even if you try to show off. Oh, it's not a lie. I pointed to my smartphone screen, which displayed Ben's name and photo. Julia stared at it intently before exclaiming. Ford, as in that major real estate group, the president, no way, it's no lie. At my words, Julia glared at me resentfully. Then, pointing at our clothes, she berated us. Then why are you wearing such shabby clothes? To that, I gave Julia a patronizing look. Because we need to dress according to the financial situation of the household, right? Excuse me? Are you saying our house has fallen on hard times? No, I judged that this level of courtesy was appropriate. Both Ben and I always make sure to dress nicely to show our regard when visiting someone's home. We've never disrespected anyone by wearing worn-out t-shirts and jeans. That's exactly why we deliberately chose to wear these clothes this time. There are two reasons for this choice. The first is to mislead Julia like we did and dampen her spirits. Seeing her frustrated face meant this was a success. The second reason became apparent as I started walking toward the living room, followed by Ben, with Julia trailing behind us. Having Ben by my side makes me feel incredibly supported. I energetically opened the living room door. You're making quite a racket. Be more demure like Julia when you open the door. What's with that cheap look? I'm truly disappointed in you. Their immediate reproach upon opening the door made me burst into quiet laughter, which made my parents look at me as if I were something suspicious. Julia was saying something about marrying a rich man, but it seems like Anna was just putting on airs. Exactly. That's all you can afford to wear, isn't it? We'd prefer you didn't cross our threshold in such cheap clothing. As my parents freely criticized me, I smiled and retorted. Maybe it's judging people by their clothes that's leading to the downfall of your business. What? My words made my parents blink in disbelief, while Julia looked puzzled. I decided to explain further. I heard that last year was a loss. And this term seems dubious too, how is it? That's none of your business. I'd like to say it's none of my business, but unfortunately, we're still legally related. My father glared at me angrily, his expression so similar to Julia's. It reminded me that I take after my mother, while Julia is more like our father. In fact, my father's company has been declining ever since Chris married Julia. Ben checked after Julia called, and far from recovering, the company's performance is only worsening. The second reason we wore low-priced clothes is this. We wanted to let our nearly bankrupt parents underestimate us, so when they learned we knew about their impending bankruptcy, the impact would be greater. I continued talking to my glaring parents with a sigh. I intend to renounce any inheritance when the time comes. You were planning on taking the inheritance? Money grubber. All of Mom and Dad's money is mine. Julia, who had been silent in the background, interrupted me with a bite in her voice. It seems she didn't understand what I was saying. Though I could explain it politely, it felt too bothersome. Just when I thought it was pointless to continue without explaining, Ben succinctly took over for me. Your parents' company is about to go bankrupt. What? Julia, surprised, looked at our parents, who awkwardly averted their gaze. Then, shockingly, Julia wrapped her arms around Ben's. So Ben, could you cover for them? In return, you can do whatever you want with me, just kidding. Despite Julia's light-hearted words, tension filled the air between Ben and me. Ben sighed heavily, forcibly removed Julia's arms, and spoke up. Could you stop? It's really disgusting. Disgusting? Me? Yeah, you. It's disgusting. Ben emphasized his point, clearly disturbed. Julia, apparently shocked, staggered away from Ben and then glared at me with teary eyes. How dare you say something so rude to me? I'm prettier than that plain sister of yours. What? That's impossible. Anna is slimmer, her skin is clearer, and her features are finer. More importantly, her heart is much purer. Ben went on to list my good qualities. My cooking skills, intelligence, compassion, and above all, my honesty. Hearing this, it sounded like I was some sort of perfect being, which was somewhat embarrassing. I tried to stop Ben by lightly tugging on his sleeve twice. Then, Ben turned to me with a warm smile. This modesty is another charm that sets you apart. Excuse me, Julia stomped her feet in frustration. Julia had grown considerably larger than the last time I saw her, likely gaining around 45 pounds. Her once admired beautiful face was now marred with acne and blemishes, far from pretty. It seemed like a combination of parental indulgence and a slowdown in metabolism due to age had caused her to gain weight, a lack of self-control typical of Julia. I sighed internally at this thought. However, my parents rushed to Julia's defense. Julia has just gotten a bit rounder after giving birth. She'll be back to her old self in no time. No, this is clearly the result of an unhealthy lifestyle. You stay out of this. My mother was furious, her face turning red as she yelled at me. The mother I once thought was absolute now didn't intimidate me at all after 6 years. I then shared another truth with them. By the way, there's a possibility that Julia's son isn't Chris's child, right? Hey, is that true? As I spoke, Chris's voice came from behind. Turning around, I saw Chris holding 2 babies. Oh, Chris. Long time no see. That doesn't matter. What are you talking about? Chris approached me angrily, but Ben stepped in to explain on my behalf. Anna told me about Chris, so we had someone look into it before coming here. We didn't expect to find anything so quickly, but... Ben took out his smartphone, showing a photo of a man and woman entering a hotel hand in hand. Chris exclaimed upon seeing it. You're still seeing that guy? Then, Chris began to rant unasked. She cheated on me right after we got married, with that guy in the photo. She said it was just once, so I forgave her. Chris glared at Julia, who then glared back and retorted. Forgave me? You became a subsidiary of my dad's company, and you're still so arrogant. What? You insisted it was the best move. Julia and Chris started blaming each other, their argument turning ugly. It seems that Chris's business became a subsidiary of my father's company shortly after their marriage, leading to its downfall. I should have never divorced Anna. What? Are you saying you prefer your ex-wife over me? Impossible. As Julia hysterically yelled, Chris raised his voice too. Of course. Anna never blamed me for cheating, and I was free to do as I pleased. If it were Anna's child, she would take care of it, so I wouldn't have to. Chris then seemed to have an epiphany. That's it. Anna, let's get remarried. It was our destiny to be together. Chris, getting ahead of himself, knelt before me in elation. I stepped back in disgust. Then, Ben stepped between Chris and me. Anna is my wife. There's no way she would remarry you. What? What are you? Move. Chris yelled at Ben in annoyance. From behind Ben, I responded clearly to Chris. I could never remarry you. I would never want your children. Oh, that's right, you couldn't have children. Still, it's impossible. Huh? What do you mean I can't have children? Chris stared at us, dumbfounded, just like my parents and Julia. I decided to explain to them. When I was still married to you, I went to the gynecologist. Remember, I had some tests done? Don't you remember? Ah, there was that time you dragged me to the gynecologist. But it was your fault, wasn't it? Chris seemed eager to believe it was my fault, insisting repeatedly that there was nothing wrong with his health. I confronted Chris with the truth that had been hidden for over 6 years. The one who couldn't have children was you, Chris. That's a lie, a lie. Then whose kids are these? They're mine, right? Unfortunately, they're not your children. Chris slumped in defeat upon hearing this. The nanny hurriedly took the babies from Chris' hands. In the background, Julia stood with her mouth agape. So, Julia, it seems they're not Chris's children. Sis, why didn't you tell me he had such a defect? If you had told me, by now. Julia began to shift the blame to me. I listened quietly until she calmed down a bit, then smiled and said, You've made your bed, now lie in it. What? Give me Ben then. Ben already refused you, remember? Then give me money. Families should help each other. You're the one to say that. Her words irritated me. There was never any mutual support in our family during tough times. Instead, I was met with cold indifference. Unfortunately, I'm not part of your family. You are. Come on, sis, don't be like that. Despite being annoyed by Julia's words, arguing back wouldn't help. I took a deep breath, preparing to respond, but my mother spoke before I could. Anna, I'm sorry for everything. But we're really struggling. If you really have money, could you help us? Right, Julia is correct. Family should help each other. Let's forget the past and move on. I was utterly dismayed by their words. Forgiveness is something the wronged party offers, not the wrongdoers. Realizing that urging them to reflect was futile, I let go of the last bit of familial affection I had and gave them a cold look. The three of them flinched at my gaze, but quickly forced a sickly smile. We apologize for everything, okay? Exactly, we're even asking nicely. You should compromise a little. Their unrepentant attitude was clear, making me sigh. With a smile only on my lips, I posed a question to my mother. Why should I go to such lengths for a half-sister and biological parents who oppressed me? Half-sister? What are you talking about? Julia is my daughter. Despite my father's lack of understanding, it seemed my mother grasped what I was implying, turning pale. What are you even saying, child? It's fine if you want to play dumb, but I saw you, Mom. I caught you cheating. Indeed, when I was still living at home, I had witnessed my mother bringing a man into our house. It happened shortly after they were married. Both my father and Chris were away on business trips, and Julia was on a vacation with her friends. It was just my mother and me at home. Returning from an errand my mother asked me to run, I found unfamiliar men's shoes at the door. Thinking we had a visitor, I checked the living room, but it was empty. Puzzled, I then heard voices coming from the bedroom. I wanted to cover my ears. However, the next words I heard made my eyes widen. He doesn't know Julia isn't his child. Julia isn't Dad's child. I covered my mouth with both hands, shocked. I wanted to hear more, but sensing them about to leave the bedroom, I quickly left the house to kill time and returned only after the man had left. Curious about that incident, I investigated right after marrying Ben and discovered the man was Mr. Thompson, an old friend of my father's. The affair was still ongoing. So, because you've been cheating with him all this time, and when Julia wanted Chris, you forced me out. What the hell does that mean? While my mother shook her head in denial, turning paler, even my typically oblivious father seemed to understand, glaring at my mother in fury. I decided to give my father a parting gift by naming my mother's lover. Mom's lover is Mr. Thompson. Thompson, she cheated with him. Even now. At my words, my father stood dumbfounded. Mr. Thompson was considered a close friend of my father, so the betrayal must have been especially shocking. However, even in such a situation, I couldn't bring myself to feel sympathy for my father. I'm not Dad's child. Julia was also stunned, leaving no one to snap back at me. Are we done here? I've decided to renounce my inheritance, so do as you please from now on. But in return, I won't help. Please, no further contact. Though my voice trembled slightly at the end, I managed to say everything I wanted. It was time to leave. I signaled Ben, and just before exiting, I turned back to pull an envelope from my bag. Oh, right, this is the compensation you threw at me. I haven't used it, so the amount is still the same. Consider it a return gift for the birth celebration. It's a bit more than what you wanted, but let's call it severance. I placed the envelope in front of Julia, who was too shocked to react. Leaving the four of them behind, we exited the house. Later, I heard my parents remained married, but their relationship turned icy. My mother's actions were severely restricted, effectively ending her affair with Mr. Thompson. My father stepped down from his CEO position and attempted to live off his pension, but due to long-term financial mismanagement, they ended up selling their house. When I passed by their old house recently, it had been demolished, which was oddly satisfying. Reportedly, they're now living in a rented apartment, struggling to make ends meet with both parents having to work, a new experience for my mother, who had never worked before. Julia and her husband divorced, with Julia taking custody of the children. However, Julia, who had never worked before and now had 2 children to care for, found it impossible to manage on her own and ended up imposing herself on the man she had an affair with. It turns out this man was already married and currently embroiled in his own domestic troubles. Despite feeling some sympathy for her because we share the same blood, a part of me can't help but think she got what she deserved, considering everything she has done in the past. Chris tried to turn his company around after the divorce but found it impossible as his reputation had already been tarnished, leading to severed business ties. His stocks plummeted after leaving the umbrella of the parent company, making it impossible for him to continue operations. Eventually, Chris's company went bankrupt. Furthermore, Chris, now penniless, fell for a marriage scam through a matchmaking app, losing even the compensation Julia had paid him. He also accumulated debt from dubious sources and is now laboring in construction every day to pay off his debts. Ben received a call from Chris begging for money but firmly refused, citing they were strangers. Given Chris's last words about divorcing me, I find no room for sympathy. As for me, I've recently discovered that I'm expecting our first child. Ben was overjoyed upon hearing the news and had already started designing a child-first home. He's even getting ahead of himself by selecting babysitters, which makes me laugh at his excitement. We're expecting a boy. I'm estranged from my family, and Ben has no relatives, but the people in our town have been incredibly kind, offering their help in various ways. To be born into a town where everyone is so kind, this child is going to be so lucky. Ben and I talk about this every night. How are you feeling today, Anna? I'm feeling quite well today, thank you. That's great. I hope a healthy baby is born. Yes, thank you. When I go out for a walk, everyone greets me like that. It makes me so happy, and I truly feel grateful to have come to this town. Anna. I couldn't decide between blue and green for the blankets, so I bought both. You're getting ahead of yourself again. While I chide Ben for his frequent purchases, I knit socks for the baby, planning to finish them a week before the due date. Oh, he kicked. Really? It's Daddy here. At my word, Ben listens to my stomach and talks to it. Just then, the baby kicks again. He answered. You like Daddy, don't you? Daddy loves you too. Oh, Ben. Despite being a bit exasperated, I find Ben's actions endearing. Immersed in this happiness, I continue knitting the socks.